Thank you, Chair. First, I should mention that the bio which has been distributed, not exactly what I have submitted, but in any way, there is no big mistakes in that.
I think even yesterday, some of the panel participants found some discrepancies in the bios, but nonetheless,
this is
please.
The point. I was not going to speak on Ukraine because this is not the topic of the conference, but after yesterday's discussion, I feel that I have to say at least a few words. As part of my presentation, I will be happy to discuss it later during Q&A session if we will have time. First, again, we could not speak about Crimean crisis. This is Ukraine crisis, because Crimea is just one element of that. And if we are trying to remove Crimea from, the real context, we will face the problems, and we misguide the public, we mislead our officials. First. Second, most of Russians has very personal relation to the crisis because of family connections. I'm personally partially Ukrainian. One of my grandfather is Ukrainian. I still have uncle who is living in Ukraine with his family. And this is the case for at least 25% of Ukrainian families who has either Russian husband or Russian origin wife. And we should keep it in mind when we discuss the crisis. Second, the problem I face that it looks like nobody cares about Ukrainian people when we discuss the crisis. And unfortunately, this is the case for many officials in Russia, in EU, in US as well. And this is the problem. It looks like many people are trying to build their political capital based on the crisis, through the crisis, but not solve the problem of Ukraine, because the major problem of Ukraine is instability inside. And for example, I'm quite surprised that still there is no any working group which would include EU, for example, and Russian scholars and experts, what can be done. Everybody is too much focused on sanctions, blacklists, and Russian side is focused on retaliation, and that's it. Nobody paid too much attention what is next. So how to keep the Ukraine stable and how to prevent further growth of violence. Fourth point, I don't see any ground to discuss whether it was a mistake or not of Ukrainian government to remove the nuclear weapons, because Ukraine never had full control over nuclear weapon. It was based on Ukrainian territory. I spoke many times with the Russian military who are not in position to speak on the record, but who can be available to speak off the record. For example, and one of the points which was made, for example, Ukraine never had security codes, so they were not able to activate the nuclear weapons which was based on their territory. So when we put Ukraine to the same list where South Africa is, we misguide and we mislead the officials and public. And I think partially this is the problem of our community, of expert community, when we put Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus to the same list where South Africa is, which built nuclear weapons, but one day decided to give this program up. And the final point, and this is my problem with all this story, that nobody cares about international law. And this is the problem. It was the case during the Libyan crisis, and it was unfortunately the case during Ukrainian crisis, including to some extent by Russian officials, because nobody in the Russian government was able to persuade from legal point of view what had happened. And I see this as a problem for the future as well. And this issue must be addressed. So I will stop here on Ukraine. I apologize for starting with that, but not with my presentation, but I will be quick with my presentation. My Chinese colleague made a very good presentation, a kind of overview where we are and what can be done. So I will skip a few of my first slides. The picture is not rosy if we discuss unilateral nuclear arms reduction. Nothing has been done yet in this particular area. I would not speak in general what can be done. I would like to propose quite a practical proposal. Probably this is the proposal for the perfect world, and our world is not perfect, as we know. But at least I think we should try to be creative when we discuss what kind of steps can be done, and some minor steps are needed, because it will take years and years when we can negotiate a real multinational treaty on nuclear arms reduction. So I believe that some minor steps can be done before. But when we discuss nuclear disarmament and nuclear cuts, we should not forget about irreversibility. This was mentioned in the 13 steps of nuclear disarmament in the final document of NPT review in 2005. It was mentioned in the final document of the NPT review conference in 2010 a few times. And this is quite important. And if you have a look on the Russian-US nuclear arms treaty, none of them cover, for example, weapons-grade material disposition, including the recent one, New START. And partially, irreversibility was achieved through so-called HEU deal, when Russia and the US in 1993 agreed that 500 tons of Russian HEU will be downblended and used as a fuel in US reactors. And partially in response to that, 3 years later, US launched a unilateral initiative to downblend almost 200 tons of HEU. So the HEU deal has been completed last year. US also almost completed downblending of its 200 tons of plutonium. And there is also agreement on, uranium, highly enriched uranium. And there is also agreement on plutonium, which still to be implemented, and even under current political circumstances, I do think that there are some prospects, and there are, I would even say, good prospects, that this agreement can be implemented. Because to implement that, we should not involve military from both sides, so it's mostly about diplomats' work and nuclear industry people work. So I hope that we will be able to implement that, at least from the Russian side. There is huge interest to continue this program. So during the recent months, I personally and my center was actively involved in analysis how Russian-US past experience in weapons-grade material disposition can be used for the future. As I mentioned, I'm still optimistic that we can continue cooperation on that, especially since this kind of cooperation does not involve military people, which is a problem at this stage. But I would like to share an idea what can be done, how this experience, Russian-US experience, could be applied to multilateral format. So I call it megaton to megawatts 2.0. So what this is about? First of all, I believe that all 8 nuclear weapons countries should be invited, and the participation of the PRK could be decided on a later stage. So what are the key points of the initiative? So each state party declares a certain amount of nuclear material in proportion to the size of nuclear arsenal as an excess, and as an excess to its defense requirements. And we know that these days the so-called nuclear fuel, IAEA nuclear fuel bank, or IAEA LEU reserve, is being established. So my idea that this material, which would be downblended, could be delivered to this IAEA LEU bank, which is going to be located in Kazakhstan. And it's up to a country from the list to decide what would be the contribution. It should be HEU or it should be plutonium, but in the case of plutonium, so it could be used either by France or by Russia, because this is just two countries which would have MOX fuel production facility in the upcoming future. But in return, Russia and France would contribute an equivalent in LEU to the IEA LEU bank. And of course, there are many technical issues which must be discussed before such initiative could be implemented. For example, how a nuclear weapon state could transfer its weapons-grade plutonium, because this is a state secret. But I do believe that some solutions of that, technical solutions, can be found. At least there is an experience of Russia and US particular with some IEA cooperation, what can be done with this regard. How to start the discussion? There is a rather new format, 5+2, which exclude Israel at this stage, but I don't see any problem to invite Israel to discuss this particular issue, if Israel will be ready, because my understanding that they were informally invited to join P+2 group, but declined. And it's also important that this material should be under IAEA safeguards. So every country should be ready to place it under IAEA safeguards. And it's also important that this material should not have any national obligation code, which means that IAEA can use this material or should be able to use this material with no additional permission from the country of origin. Excuse me, it doesn't work. Problem. No. And my idea that if some countries are ready to supply the material for free, it will be perfect. But IAEA got enough funding to pay for material, and my understanding that as of now, IAEA is searching for a source of LEU material for its bank. So I mean, IAEA is capable to pay for LEU, which will be delivered to the fuel LEU reserve based on market price. I would not go in all details of this idea. I would be happy to comment on that later, and I also have slides we'll be happy to share with those who are interested. So what I would like to mention at the end, another important point which I missed, that of course there is no official data on the nuclear arsenal, so we will have to use those estimates which are available. And there are a number of them, and I don't think that the source of this data will impact a lot. Yeah, will impact a lot on this project, because there are. Sorry. Yeah. So there are 3 tiers or 3 layers. I use Bruno's terms here. Again, I think that could be 3 tiers. We can make even the 4th if we decide to include North Korea at a certain stage. But again, in any way, my understanding that Russia and US will be in the first, Britain, China, France will be in the second, Israel, India, Pakistan in the third. And my understanding that it's very similar to what just my Chinese colleague presented. So what the results will be? So HEU equivalent of 29 nuclear warheads of He or plutonium will be disposed. And for a number of states, it will be the first experience to negotiate internally this kind of nuclear cuts or nuclear cuts related issues. And I think this experience will be or could be quite an important as a first minor step, because we know in the past that there are some important initiatives which in the field of non-proliferation or disarmament, which for domestic reasons never been fully implemented, or some agreements never been ratified. So altogether, this initiative will help to contribute 22.5 tons of LEU to IAEA LEU bank, which is about 1/3 of what IAEA is looking for as part of its LEU reserve. And I think that such a step can facilitate discussion on FMCT. I'll stop here. Thank you.